The announcement arrived without a single warning. Tournament officials at the Berlin Open had spent the better part of several days tearing apart and rebuilding the draw from scratch, all because a wave of high-profile withdrawals had shaken the competition to its core. Seeded players were elevated. Alternates were called up. The carefully constructed bracket that organizers had spent weeks engineering was suddenly unrecognizable. Nearly every player in the field was affected by the chaos. Nearly every player. But when Alex Eala sat down, reviewed the revised draw, and understood not just what the tournament had changed, but what it had deliberately chosen not to change, her response stopped the tennis world in its tracks. She didn't lower her head and move on. She didn't offer a polite smile and say nothing. Instead, she walked into a room full of journalists and cameras and delivered a statement so direct, so unflinching, that the entire sport is still processing it. What exactly unfolded at the Berlin Open that pushed Eala past the point of silence? And why are so many people calling it the most defining moment of her young career? The stage. Berlin, June 14th, 2026. The story begins in Berlin, Germany, at the historic Rot-Weiss Tennis Club on June 14th, 2026. Even before the first ball had been struck, tournament officials were already fighting to keep things under control. Withdrawals were piling up faster than the draw could absorb them, and the atmosphere behind the scenes was growing increasingly tense. The first major blow came when Anastasia Anisimova announced she was pulling out, sending an immediate shockwave through the bracket. As a direct result, Coco Gauff was elevated in the seeding order and awarded a first-round bye. But Anisimova's exit was only the opening act. More withdrawals followed, and quickly. Fresh off her historic French Open triumph, Mira Andreeva stepped away from Berlin to rest and focus her preparation on Wimbledon. Canadian rising star Victoria Mboko was forced out with a knee injury. Then Belinda Bencic, Jasmine Paolini, and Shuai Zhang all joined the growing list of absentees. What had once been a field boasting 9 of the world's top 10 players was now scrambling to stay balanced. The reshuffle triggered a domino effect across the draw. Diana Schneider was elevated into a seeded position. Anastasia Potapova, Elise Mertens, Anna Kalinskaya, and Wang Xinyu all benefited from the revised structure, their positions improving, their paths shifting favorably. For most players in the field, the changes simply meant adapting to new opponents, adjusting tactics, and moving forward. For Alex Eala, however, what was unfolding felt like something else entirely. The moment she noticed late on Sunday evening, as tournament officials at Rot-Weiss finalized the updated draw, Eala sat down and read through every detail. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Her first-round opponent remained Donna Vekic, a player she had already defeated twice earlier in the season. Her position in the bracket was unchanged, with a potential second-round showdown against world number 2 Elena Rybakina still looming on the horizon. But as she continued reading, something shifted in her expression. The issue wasn't her opponent. It wasn't her seeding position. According to sources close to the situation, the real problem centered on a decision, one that applied to her differently than it did to almost everyone else in the draw. While several other players were receiving favorable adjustments in the wake of the withdrawals, protections, accommodations, and structural benefits, Eala was told her circumstances would remain exactly as they were. No adjustments. No accommodations. No change. The revelation reportedly hit her hard. And the deeper she looked, the more the picture came into focus. A pattern she could no longer ignore. It wasn't just match scheduling. It wasn't just one detail sitting in isolation. Sources close to Eala described the situation as a pattern, one that extended to practice court access, warm-up conditions, and last-minute scheduling changes. While multiple other competitors were being carefully shielded from the disruption caused by the draw reshuffle, Eala was left exposed to the full uncertainty of it. No shield. No protection. No explanation. Those close to her described her as visibly frustrated. Not rattled, not emotional, but frustrated in the deep, quiet way that comes from a feeling you've carried for a long time finally being confirmed. Because for Eala, this was not an isolated incident. It was the latest chapter in a story that had been building for weeks. A fitness advisory dispute before Birmingham. A $50,000 fine, she contested. Disputed participation fees. Exclusion from an elite player development camp. And now this, a tournament draw reshuffle in which almost every other player received some form of accommodation, while she was left standing alone outside that circle. In the past, she had responded to all of it the same way. With professionalism. With restraint. With silence. She had smiled when it hurt. She had nodded when she disagreed. She had signed waivers, paid fines, and kept her frustrations locked behind closed doors, choosing to let her tennis do the speaking while the system continued to make her life difficult. But something in Berlin was different. Something in her had finally reached its limit. The press conference, June 14, 2026, Rot-Weiss Tennis Club. The journalists who filed into the press conference room that evening were expecting routine updates, draw revisions, scheduling notes, standard player reactions to the withdrawal chaos. What they got was something none of them had prepared for. Alex Eala stepped up to the podium looking composed, but there was something behind her eyes, a sharp, quiet intensity that immediately changed the energy in the room. Cameras adjusted. Conversations stopped. Journalists leaned forward. "I need to address something," she began, her voice steady and measured, but carrying an unmistakable edge. She explained, clearly and directly, what had happened. That due to the draw reshuffle caused by the wave of withdrawals, she, and she alone, had been informed she would not receive the same accommodations as other players. Her schedule, her practice access, her warm-up conditions, all of it subject to unpredictable, last-minute changes that other players in the draw were being actively protected from. She paused, tightened her jaw, and then asked a question the entire room felt like a blade cutting through air. "I want to know why." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't happen by accident. Every journalist in that room understood they were witnessing something far larger than a tournament press conference. Eala continued, "I have played by the rules. I have paid my fines. I have signed waivers when the WTA told me I wasn't fit to play. I have smiled. I have waved. I have said the right things, while the establishment made my life difficult." Another pause. Then, with a firmness that made the room go completely still, "But I am done being quiet." The silence stretched for several seconds before she pushed forward again, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for fair treatment. The same treatment every other player in this draw is receiving. And if this tournament cannot provide that, then I want a public explanation for why." A tournament official moved to step in. Eala raised her hand and stopped him without even looking in his direction. "I'm not finished," she said, and then turned directly toward the cameras. What followed was not directed at the journalists in that room. It was directed at the world watching beyond it. "To the fans who have crossed oceans to watch me play, thank you. To the Filipino community here in Germany, who has welcomed me like one of their own, thank you. And to everyone who has ever been told they don't belong, that they don't deserve the same opportunities as everyone else, I see you. I am you. And I will not stop fighting for fair treatment." She stepped back from the podium. "That's all I have to say." The room remained motionless for what felt like a long time after she walked away. No follow-up questions. No dramatic conclusion. Just heavy silence, and a statement that had already begun to travel far beyond the walls of that room. The world responds within minutes. The footage was everywhere. The hashtag Eala Fights Back exploded across social media, climbing to the top of trending lists in the Philippines, Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia, almost simultaneously. The clip was shared millions of times. Reactions poured in from every direction. Supporters praised her courage. Critics questioned whether she had gone too far. Analysts rushed to unpack the implications. But beneath every opinion, regardless of which side it landed on, one thing was undeniable. Alex Eala had drawn a clear, permanent line. In Manila, fans flooded social media with messages of solidarity. One post highlighted her words, "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for fair treatment," calling them not a sign of entitlement but of justice, describing Eala as a true leader. Another declared that speaking publicly against unequal treatment under the weight of elite competition requires a kind of courage that most people never have to find. A third simply noted that after everything she had endured, the fines, the sanctions, the exclusions, the repeated battles, her willingness to keep speaking out only strengthened her status as a champion. Tennis journalists and analysts worked quickly to frame what they had just witnessed. One commentator described the press conference as genuinely unprecedented, noting they had never seen a player openly challenge tournament organizers over the fairness of competitive conditions in a pre-tournament setting at this level. Another analyst observed that while the draw reshuffle had disrupted many players, the heart of Eala's claim was specific and serious. She believed she had been singled out. And, if accurate, speaking publicly wasn't just her right, it was the correct thing to do. Current and former players added their voices to the conversation. Coco Gauff, elevated to 5th seed due to the withdrawals, addressed the situation in her own press conference. She hadn't spoken directly with Eala, she said, but made clear. She's not someone who complains without reason. If she spoke out, it means something needed to be addressed. I support her. Venus Williams, who is scheduled to partner with Eala in doubles at the Bad Homburg Open, posted a pointed statement. When players raise concerns about unequal treatment, they deserve to be heard and taken seriously. And Billie Jean King, one of the defining architects of women's professional tennis, was perhaps most direct of all. The WTA was founded to give players a platform, she wrote. Eala using hers is consistent with the spirit of this organization, not a violation of it. Berlin Open Tournament director Markus Soki was asked to respond. His answer was carefully worded and diplomatically measured, and it did essentially nothing to quiet the controversy. We are reviewing Miss Eala's concerns. The Berlin Open is committed to providing fair conditions for all players, and we will address any issues directly with her team. Eala's reaction, when she was informed of the statement, was immediate and characteristically unfiltered. I don't need a review. I need action. Fair treatment shouldn't require a review. It should be automatic. Back to what matters. The court match day arrived at Rot-Weiss Tennis Club on June 15, 2026, and with it, the tournament's attention shifted back to competition. ND cooled. The press conferences were over. The diplomatic statements had been issued and dismissed. And Eala had already moved on. Her first-round opponent was Donna Vekic, and make no mistake, Vekic was dangerous. The seasoned Croatian veteran was arriving in Berlin in peak form, fresh off a stunning title run at Queen's Club where she had entered as a lucky loser and walked out as champion. The two had history as well. Eala had edged past Vekic in a tight 3-set battle at the ASB Classic in Auckland, 4-6, 6-4, 6-4, but Vekic would be arriving with full belief that the result could go the other way. None of it seemed to be weighing on Eala. I've said what I needed to say, she told reporters before stepping out for her match. Now it's time to play. Everything else is noise. But beneath the surface calm, the stakes were enormous. The Berlin Open was not simply another week on the calendar. Ranked 33rd in the world and sitting just outside Wimbledon's seeding cutoff, Eala knew that a deep run in Berlin could push her inside the seeded positions for the grass court Grand Slam. An early exit could send her back into uncertainty. And yet, beyond rankings and seedings and tournament draws, something deeper was fueling her. Philippines, that's always in the back of my mind. That's what drives me. The legacy, she had reflected as the tension surrounding Berlin continued to build around her. At just 21 years old, the player from Quezon City had already become something larger than a tennis ranking or a tournament result. She was a symbol. A competitor who had spoken openly about fairness, demanded accountability from the system, and refused, repeatedly, publicly, at personal cost, to accept silence as the only acceptable response. Her press conference in Berlin was not, in her view, about victimhood. It was about principle. It was about insisting that fair treatment is not a favor to be granted selectively. It is a standard to be applied consistently, to everyone without exception. I am not asking for special treatment, she had said, standing at that podium with the cameras rolling. I am asking for fair treatment. What comes next? The Berlin Open was still only beginning. Vekic waited in the first round, a dangerous, experienced opponent in the form of her life. Beyond her, potentially stood world number 2, Elena Rybakina, one of the most formidable players on the planet. The path was steep. The pressure was real. And the controversy surrounding her words had added an additional layer of weight to every step she would take onto that court. But for a player who had already navigated fines and waivers, sanctions and setbacks, grass court titles and ranking breakthroughs, this was simply another test. Another obstacle in a career that had been defined, from the very beginning, by the refusal to be broken. From junior champion to world number 33. From the courts of Quezon City to the historic grounds of Rot-Weiss in Berlin. From a player fighting for points to a voice the entire sport had been forced to reckon with. She had said what she needed to say. Now it was time to play. And in a sport long defined by silence and restraint, by nodding and smiling and accepting whatever the system handed you, Alex Eala had already changed the tone forever. Whether the system was ready for what came next was, at this point, beside the point.
She was.